So requirements, design patterns, cloud architecture, oh my, not quite the session we were expecting here, but we'll run with it. So hopefully the majority of you know me already, Chris Reddington. I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and day to day, my job is all about helping customers be successful as they build their solutions and their projects on Azure. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the things that I've seen as maybe some common pitfalls, also talk about some of the tools that are out there and the things in the kit bag that can really help you get going and be successful in those projects. So let's start with an analogy. Let's go and design a building, and feel free to jump into the chat with some comments here as well. But if you design a building, where is it that you actually start? Just think about that for a moment, and feel free to jump off mute as well if you want to answer over voice as well.
Probably the basement.
The basement, sure, okay.
Community meetups to find out what the people around you are thinking about your new building, to see if it's going to have any impact on the landscape around them.
Okay, so thinking about everyone else. Good, good, good. What else? Blueprints. All good thoughts. And the thing is, right, this is a deliberately vague question, because when we think about building a cloud solution or a cloud project, it's equally a blank canvas. So what type of building is it? Is it an office? Is it a hotel? Is it a hospital? Is it a house? How do we design the foundations? Someone mentioned blueprints there earlier in the basement. So those foundations that the rest of the building builds upon, really key. What about external regulations? Maybe with those other communities we might need to meet with, or even building regulations, for example. But things like budget, the timeframes, the future growth of the building. If it's like a hospital, do we need to add future wards to it in the future as well? What's the capacity of the building, maybe for fire safety and all of these types of concerns? So when you start thinking about those analogies, actually, they translate really well into a cloud solution. When you think of the purpose of the building, what's the purpose of a cloud solution? Is it the main application, for example, for the business that's bringing in all of the revenue? Or is it some back office function that's maybe processing once a month, not incredibly critical if it goes down, for example? How do you make sure the right foundations are in place? Well, that's something called landing zones, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. What about regulations? Like industry regulations for healthcare or financial services, or even regional regulations like GDPR, something we're all familiar with. Things like budget with cost management. What materials might you need to use for the building? You could think about what cloud services you need to use, like IaaS. Are you only allowed IaaS because your company or your organization doesn't quite trust PaaS yet, or doesn't quite understand PaaS? Or maybe the opposite. They're only using PaaS because they don't want any of that traditional management and operational overhead anymore. They want to eliminate as much of that as possible. So you can see how all of these ideas of thinking about the different properties of a building translate into this cloud solution. And that's where something like the Azure Well-Architected framework comes in. So tip number one for the evening, if you haven't heard of the Azure Well-Architected framework, definitely go and check it out. I'll make sure there's a link in the chat window for everyone here as well. But the Azure Well-Architected framework is a set of documentation and also an assessment as well, where it's based around these different pillars of software design and cloud design. So cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiencies, reliability, and scalability. And when you think about all of those questions from a moment ago, you know, designing the foundations, the materials you need to use, adhering to external events like BCDR, high availability, future growth because of business targets, all of those things fit into those buckets. So it maps really well from an analogy perspective. Now, it's not just about the documentation, because the well-architected framework has a lot of great documentation there, but there's also an assessment as well across those different pillars. So if you're at a stage where actually maybe you don't have those requirements well defined at the moment, and that's okay, but it's absolutely something that you want to make sure you can have clearly defined before you start really getting into the building phase, because failing to plan, planning to fail. I'm sure we've all heard that phrase in the past. But without knowing your requirements, you don't really know what you're targeting, what your aim is, what your end goal is. So how do you know what is your definition of done? How do you know what that foundation should be for the rest of the solution? How do you know what design patterns are appropriate so you're not over-engineering a solution? And likewise, if you've got a super complex solution like, I don't know, a financial services organization, thinking about trades, etc., how do you know that you're not under-designing a solution as well, so you're not necessarily going to meet those requirements? So from both of those angles, really important to consider requirements there. So the well-architected framework can help you in defining those requirements, understanding where you are on that journey so far. But once you've defined them, once you've got those clear, how do you then map those requirements to the foundations of your cloud infrastructure? Well, once again, if we think about the foundations of a building, let's think about something like an office block versus a hotel, for example. Both are high-rise buildings, but they'll be set up in very different ways. So an office block, for example, you wouldn't have individual rooms or individual apartments, I suppose. You'd have potentially open plan floors. Maybe you'd have individual offices, for example. That would mean very different things from where your electricity sockets go, how you do the plumbing, for example, because obviously in an apartment or a hotel, or sorry, an office, a hotel or apartment block, I should say, you'd have maybe bathrooms and toilets, etc., in each of the individual rooms, for example. So each of those different contexts, again, means that you're going to have a different type of foundation depending upon what you're building. That makes sense from a building perspective, whether we're talking about a house, an office, a hospital, even a village or a town, for example. The scale of that is very different. But it also makes sense from a cloud perspective as well. So think about that from, for example, mapping those concepts back again. Think about electricity in a building scenario. We wouldn't be able to do this call right now if we didn't have electricity. So I think a lot of our day-to-day is really underpinned by electricity. And you can think about identity in the same way. From a cloud perspective, the way we log into Azure, the way we log into our applications, the way we work with stuff, quite frankly, in the cloud, is all really based upon identity and good identity principles. That building-specific implementation, the idea of maybe different apartments in an apartment block versus different offices or different wards in a hotel, you could think about that like different network topologies almost, and how you segregate off different parts of the solution from each other. External regulations, your governance disciplines, quality control, and whether it's all built to standard, is your operation baselines and your operational procedures. Business continuity and disaster recovery is whether your building is earthquake proof and whether you have that continuity as you go on. And you can see how these different topics and these different ideas translate into this cloud perspective here as well. Well, the great thing about all of this is really this foundation is all about something called a landing zone. And a landing zone, an Azure landing zone, is really this idea of these underpinning services, these underpinning ideas that enable your applications. And that could be applications plural. Now, the point is not all of these foundations are built equally. They're not all the same. So, you know, if you are building a large retail application, you might not need the same foundation as an application which is, you know, being used for that batch job once a month. Likewise, if I'm an enterprise organization, I might have very different requirements to a startup organization, for example. So there's these different types of landing zone implementations available in the Azure Architecture Center. There's some which you can start small, and there's some which are called enterprise scale and ready for those more enterprise scenarios. There's examples in Terraform, there's examples in ARM templates as well, and they're all there available to help accelerate your journey in terms of adopting and building those landing zones there. So go and check those out if you're looking to get that foundation set up for one of your applications. Now, it all looks super scary when you put it on a PowerPoint slide and a high-level architecture, but really it breaks down to those few different pillars that we talked about earlier and those few different questions. So it's not as scary as it looks on first glance. All of this information is part of something called the Cloud Adoption Framework. So Cloud Adoption Framework I could easily talk about for an hour on its own, so we're not going to cover it in this lightning talk. But again, if you're somewhere on your journey of adopting Azure and adopting cloud, that could be a great tool in the toolkit for you to go and understand some of those wider questions in terms of adopting the cloud, planning, strategizing, making sure you're ready, having the right governance principles in place, and ultimately organizing your resources and rolling them out to your users. And then finally, to bring us into the home stretch here, we've defined our requirements. We now know what they are thanks to the well-architected framework. We've got our foundation in place with thanks to the Cloud Adoption Framework and especially the Azure Landing Zone concept. Now we've just got the application to build. It's the really easy part, right? Now to do that, we've got a number of great reference architectures available on the Azure Architecture Center that we can go and use, which is excellent. We've also got the Azure well-architected framework as well. We mentioned that a moment ago, that we use that as a baseline in the very beginning to help understand what our requirements are. And that will help us with the foundations, but it also helps us understand how we are architecting our application. Are we over-architecting the application and designing it to be too complex for the needs we need to meet? Or are we going ahead and actually not architecting it well enough that we're not going to meet the service level agreements, the recovery time objectives, the recovery point objectives that we need to go and meet? So again, the Azure well-architected framework is something as an assessment you can use on an ongoing basis as well. It doesn't need to be a one-time activity. You can use it as a baseline and measure your progress over time. Now, once you've got those requirements in place, you can then go and decide what cloud design patterns are appropriate for you to use in your application. I delivered an hour-long version of this talk yesterday to .NET Knots, and we had a great discussion around this afterwards. Some really great questions around how do you know if you've over-architected versus under-architected and whether you've introduced too much complexity or not. There's tons of cloud design patterns out there for you to go and use. The important point for you to take away here is you do not need to use all of them. You need to use the ones which are most appropriate for the requirements that you're trying to target. So think with that requirements-driven engineering standpoint in mind, because if you build too much complexity into your applications, they become hard to manage, hard to operate. And then, of course, we go through the cycle of building new applications, right? Whereas if you under-architect and don't meet those requirements, then it's not considered fit for purpose. And again, we have to re-architect and rebuild. So nailing those requirements so you can match the right cloud design patterns is the key there. So there's tons of these available. The command query responsibility segregation pattern, the geodes pattern, cache aside pattern are just some of what you see on the screen here. Probably looks really overwhelming. And if you look at the Azure Architecture Center, it looks overwhelming there too. But really take this away. You do not need to know every single one of these in depth. It's more about understanding the problems that they solve, the challenges they solve, and how to go and approach that and attack that. Now, just like there's cloud design patterns, there's also several anti-patterns as well, like not using caching, having retry storms, having a busy front end or a busy database. Again, we're not going to talk about all of those, but those are very clearly documented over on the Azure Architecture Center as well, so worth taking a look. Now, there's patterns on performance, there's patterns on resiliency, patterns on reliability as well. And a great exercise to do from an architectural perspective is something called a failure mode analysis. Walking through your architecture and understanding component by component, what happens if this thing fails or degrades? How does it impact the rest of the solution? Do we have that continuity of service that we would expect? Again, well documented, something I would encourage you to go and take a look at. So with that, wrapping up, next steps, how do you continue on this journey? First off, Microsoft Learn has some great content. I'm sure the other speakers tonight will also talk about Microsoft Learn, no doubt, but it spans not just architecture, it spans AKS, it spans serverless, it spans all of the topics that we'll be talking about here today. So check that out. And of course, the Azure Architecture Center is available as well. And I'll share the links to those in the chat window here. But with that, sorry for the tech issues at the beginning there, folks, but I think we're just about back on track. So any questions at all? Everyone's blown away.
So much to grasp.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Nilesh. And I think this is first thing is this is an hour-long talk condensed into a 15-minute presentation. So you're never going to get everything from it, even that you'd get in the hour-long talk. But also, even in the hour-long talk, people say, "Wow, there's a lot to grasp." And the key point is really, you're never going to know all of this. It's about understanding what problems these challenges are trying to solve, coming in with that requirements-driven mindset so that you can not over-engineer the solution and make sure you're really honing in on the problem you need to solve rather than trying to boil the ocean, if that makes sense. So yeah, requirements-driven, well-architected framework, landing zones, and cloud design patterns. They're my top tips for building your solutions. Perfect.
Thank you, Chris. And as you say, oh my, there's so much in there to digest, but fantastic introduction. I'm sure everyone would love to learn more about that because it's a fantastic area to get into. With that said, if there's no more questions for Chris, I suggest we pass the button to Phillip, who we're going to take us through on the journey of getting started running SAP workloads on Azure. So again, going to be equally exciting.
Cool, thanks, Russell.
So over to you, Phillip.
Cool, thank you. Hi, everyone. I will share my screen. I'll try to share my desktop because I need to switch between slides. That might not be so good.
Yep, can see the super duper ultra wide desktop.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering if I should just share. Sorry, I might just share the slides and maybe switch between them. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that's visible. So hi everyone, Phillip Parkinson. I'm a technical architect for SAP here in the UK, based in Reading, and tonight I wanted to speak about getting started with SAP on Azure. So yeah, tough act to follow after Chris, but I'll try to do my best to be entertaining. So maybe just a very brief background about SAP, I guess super brief, what SAP is, just for anybody that might not know SAP. SAP is essentially an enterprise software company. So they build ERP products and CRM products that help to manage various aspects of a business. So finance, procurement, sales, CRM. So yeah, various aspects. So Microsoft and SAP have had a partnership for some time already, for many years. And obviously Microsoft uses lots of SAP software, and likewise SAP uses lots of Microsoft software as well. And so thinking about that, I wanted to talk about maybe also in the brief history, what it was like maybe in the past installing SAP systems, which are sometimes known for being quite difficult to install, quite cumbersome. And so in the past, the installing SAP system involved a lot of manual and repetitive tasks. There would be sizing, there would be hardware purchasing if you're installing on-premises. Lots of reading, there would be master guides and then install guides and then a guide specific to your database and operating system. So pages and pages of PDFs that you would have to go through before you could actually even get started installing. And then you would have to install the operating system, configure the operating system, whether that was SUSE Linux or Windows, depending on where you're installing. Then you'd have to download all your SAP software and install it and configure the system. So lots and lots of steps that you'd have to go through before you actually have a system up and running. And the main one, obviously, is having all of the hardware that you'd need to set up. So maybe with that in mind, I thought of just showing on Azure, before we go into what the options are for running SAP on Azure, what probably one of the simplest architectures might look like on Azure. So this is just from the Microsoft docs, and this architecture could obviously scale and become a lot more complex if you included high availability and disaster recovery. But this would just essentially be an on-premises network that's using ExpressRoute into a hub and spoke type of architecture, where you'd have a gateway with some shared services in the hub, and then some VNet peering between the hub and the spoke. And then on the SAP side, you'd have your database, whether that's HANA database or Oracle or some other database, SQL Server, for example. And then you'd have your SAP central services and your SAP application server. So the central services and application server are just SAP specific parts of the system. And then you'd have your database running on that. So this is just like a really straightforward, I guess, simple architecture. And I don't know if we're sharing the slides afterwards, but if you went to the link that's below, you would be able to see lots of different reference architectures that Microsoft has documented on the Microsoft docs. So thinking about that, and you thinking about what the options are for deploying SAP on Azure, and maybe just remembering what it was like in the past, and also I guess still now customers that haven't moved to the cloud yet, in order to install and get SAP systems up and running on Azure. The three main options, sort of loosely, are using VMs, so Azure VMs, and then there's an option to use SAP HANA on Azure, so also known as HLI or HANA Large Instances, and then there's SAP Cloud Appliance Library as well. And I'd like to show you a couple of them, just maybe what they look like. So the first one, Azure VMs for SAP, there's within that obviously a couple of options that you have to install or get an SAP system up and running. So one would be via the portal, and within the marketplace there's actually pre-configured VMs that are available that have the operating system and all of that configuration already done for you. So if I maybe just switch back to my browser quickly. So you should see the Azure portal now. And if I was, for example, going to create a new resource and create a new virtual machine, under the images option, where you can choose which image you're going to use, if you select all images, and then if you do a search for SAP, you have quite a lot of different pre-configured images that are available for you to use. So these are some of the most commonly used ones, and if you go into them, you have various options available. So these are already pre-configured and certified as Azure VMs for SAP software. So you wouldn't necessarily have to install this yourself. In the past, you would have to have the hardware and then install the OS and configure it. This is already pre-configured, already certified by SAP that it meets all of the requirements. Obviously, there's some notes, etc., that you need to read, some SAP notes, but this is already available for you to use. So if you went into the marketplace here as well, again, you could see all of the different VMs that are available on the portal that you can use pre-configured. So I will switch back to the slides. Then obviously, since you're deploying VMs, you could use PowerShell and CLI commands as well. And then the other one that you can also use is Azure Resource templates. So when I switch to the browser just now again, I'll show that there's already actually some ARM templates that have been pre-configured and provided on GitHub. And you could use these templates to install VMs that are certified by Microsoft and SAP for different types of systems. So 2-tier, 3-tier architectures. And all you then need to do is install of your SAP specific software. But the architecture in terms of the VNets and subnets and all of that stuff is already configured in the VMs, and sizings are already configured for you. So that greatly reduces the amount of time that your basis people, which are SAP people that install systems, and your infrastructure people have to spend, setting up SAP systems, whereas before you'd have to do all of that stuff by yourself. So the other one that I spoke about that's available is SAP HANA on Azure, so HLI, and that's essentially offered in addition to VMs. So you can have VMs that run HANA. HANA is SAP's in-memory database. There's a number of VMs that are already certified to run HANA on Azure. But then if you needed to have much larger compute capacity, then HLI offers bare metal servers that are dedicated to that specific customer. So it's something that you have to obviously have a specific agreement with Microsoft for, and it's a dedicated server, bare metal server, that allows you to install HANA. And you can see, so for example, it goes up to 480 Intel CPU cores and up to 24 terabytes of memory on an HLI bare metal server. So that's one of the other options as well. So the other option as well is the Cloud Appliance Library, if you wanted to get up and running. And the SAP Cloud Appliance Library is a portal, I'll show you actually in a minute, maybe I'll just go to that now, that allows you to have or to run pre-configured systems. Essentially, they translate to VMs and infrastructure in whichever platform you decide to install it on. But these systems are sort of ready-made. You choose the system that you're going to install or that you're going to configure, and they either come in trial or you can extend the license as well with SAP. But it's a fully fledged, fully activated appliance. So, for example, if you had to choose this S/4HANA 2020 Feature Pack Stack 2. This is essentially SAP's latest ERP, and it would be pre-configured with all of the business processes, all of the configuration that you'd need to get up and running. So you would choose this, you would select which platform you're deploying to. So it deploys obviously to the other cloud providers as well, but then the system would be up and running, and you wouldn't even have to do any of the VM setup or any of that stuff. And once you do this, or before you do this actually, one of the things that you do is connect your Cloud Appliance Library to an actual Azure subscription. And so it then deploys it from Cloud Appliance Library into your specific Azure subscription. And if you go back into the I don't have any running at the moment, but if you go back into your subscription, you would see resource groups and various other infrastructure that's created by the Cloud Appliance Library. So in the past, this was typically used for test and demo systems, sandboxes. Customers use that quite a lot to get up and running really quickly. But actually just recently, a colleague wrote a blog post about using the Cloud Appliance Library to actually deploy Azure VMs and infrastructure for production environments as well, which includes high availability and disaster recovery too. So they're currently running some trials with specific customers, but soon you'd be able to deploy a fully fledged HADR environment for production, just using the Cloud Appliance library that you see here. So no longer just test and demo, which again greatly reduces the amount of time that you need to get up and running with SAP on Azure. So the other thing I just mentioned, I think, which I wanted to show quickly as well, is some of the templates that are available. I spoke about the ARM templates, and if you go into these on GitHub, you can see that, for example, this deploys a VM customized for SAP NetWeaver, just one server with standard or premium storage. So there's various different ones that you could deploy, and yeah, you have the options to actually deploy these, and it even gives you, for example, all of the sizing and storage details. So if you maybe just, I guess, think back to where it started in terms of the talk, where you needed to have hardware and do all of the sizing. You still need to do some sizing, obviously, but we had to have the hardware and get software, install operating systems, configure that. Now, within a couple of minutes, literally, you can have an SAP system running on Azure that you can start running your business processes and getting familiar with for your projects. So I'll go back to my slides, but I think that was, yes, that was all that I had to show today. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take those as well.
Thank you, Philip. That was on time. It's just amazing timing skills. But if you guys have got any questions for Philip, please do let him know.
I'll jump in, actually. Philip, hi there. Kai from Microsoft here. Great presentation.
Hi.
I am relatively new to SAP on Azure, and I'm interested in your view on the SAP Azure exam that we have available. I don't know whether you've been through it, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on it, and particularly the level that it's at as well.
Yes. Yeah, so good question. I did do the exam, and just a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a blog post about it actually on my personal site. So what do I think about it? I think it was pretty tough, actually, to be honest. Yeah, I'm studying for the Azure Administrator at the moment, and I still think the SAP one is pretty difficult because it combines obviously two things. It's SAP, so you have to have quite a bit of SAP specific knowledge and terminology. But then obviously you need to know the Microsoft side as well. The good thing is I think there's a lot of resources available. So Microsoft Learn, I think if you probably just use that alone, you'd be in good shape. But then Cloud Academy and Pluralsight also have really good stuff. So people like Tim Warner has a whole series on SAP on Azure, on Pluralsight. And so there's some good information available to get going, I think. But yeah, it was pretty challenging. I did find it quite difficult. I struggle mostly with the infrastructure stuff on Azure because that's newer to me. But it was a good exam, but it was challenging. But it's not. If I did it, then anybody can do it. So it's not unobtainable. And yeah, if you had any questions, I mean, I'd be happy to just reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to help you.
Great, thank you.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Philip. And to minimize the rain, background noise, distraction, without any further ado, I'm going to pass to Mert. So, Mert, it's all yours. So you can share your presentation with us.
Hello. Let me share my screen. Okay, welcome everyone. And my name is Mert Yeter, and I have only 3 slides today, and I will try to do a demo from scratch. So I am working as a software architect at Fineksus, and I am Microsoft Azure MVP and Traffic Ambassador. And you can reach me out on Twitter or LinkedIn if you have any questions about Azure or any DevOps stuff. So let's start with the definition. What is Azure Static Web Apps? It is the official definition from the MS Docs. Azure Static Web Apps is a service that automatically builds and deploys full stack web apps to Azure from a code repository. As you can see in the graphic, it supports GitHub and Azure DevOps. And today I am going to make a demo for Azure DevOps. And if we have a time left at the end, I can do a demo for GitHub Actions. So let's start with creating an application. Now, let's show you my development environment. Now I am working on a MacBook. I am one, and I am using a .NET 6 RC1, and it is running natively on my Mac. And let's start creating a directory for our repository. And let's say and now I will create an Blazor app, and let's have a look how I can create it. Okay, it's a .NET Live Blazor, and I'll give an app directory. Say my Blazor app. Okay, and I'll open it with VS Code. Okay, now I have a simple Blazor application, and I am going to initialize a new repository. Okay, I think I need gitignore file. Yes, okay. And I'll create it that if gitignore. Okay. Let's enter a message initial commit. Okay, I commit my changes to my local repository. Now let's go to Azure DevOps, and I'll create a new project. Let's say my Blazor app. Okay, let's go to repositories, and I am going to push my application to Azure repos, and I will copy that command. And let's clean that up. Okay, now I have an application on my Azure repos. Now let's go to Azure portal and create a static web app. You can find it under web, or you can search it. Okay, this is a standard resource creation. I'll start with giving it a name. Let's say static web 01. And you have 2 different hosting plans. First one is free. You can use it for hobby or personal project. For example, you can host it your blog on static web apps. And other one is the standard one. You can compare plans like this. There are some differences between, for example, custom domains, or maximum application size, or staging environments. And there's a important difference for hosting Azure functions. You can host your Azure functions on Static Web App. There are two different options. First one is managed. Managed one, you can use your Azure function, and the other one is manage or bring your own. You can publish your Azure functions code to Static Web Apps, and you can use your own Azure functions. Let's select our region, and there are two different options. First one is GitHub, and other one is not Azure DevOps. It's this other. You can publish your Azure DevOps repository, and if you sign in with GitHub, you can see your GitHub repositories. Let's sign in. It's asking for authorization. So you can select your organization, your repositories, and your branch. But today I want to start with the other one. And what it says, okay, next. I want to show it's selected with other, okay. Okay, and as you can see, if you select other after you create login to GitHub, it won't switch right now. I think Microsoft will fix this. So let's discard and create again. Okay. Okay, I think it's ready now. Okay, it's a very basic resource. You can see the configurations, and you can add application settings here. The application insights, I think it's the default resource for every Azure resource, but you need to add Azure function to enable it. You can manage your custom domains, and when you create the resource, it automatically creates a new custom domain. And also another good part is you have a free SSL certificates for this resource. You can add your functions here, and the other settings are the default settings for the Azure resource, and you can change your hosting plan here. Now let's go back to Azure DevOps, and I want to publish my application. So I will create a pipeline, and there's a button here, Setup Build. And I'll set the starter pipeline. Okay, let's delete these steps. Okay, it is still in preview. So application location, I don't have any different folder. So I'll select this like this. And I don't have any special build command. Output location for Azure Web App is www.root. And I don't have any API. So I don't have any build command or Rust location right now. And now it's asking for a static web app API token to see which resource it will deploy. So I'll go back to my overview, click manage deployment token, and I'll copy the clipboard. And I think that's okay. Okay, I edit the task. It's very simple. I think everything is okay. While it's running the job, I will create an Azure function. And let's select the resource group. And my Azure function 1. Okay. And I'll select .NET, let's select .NET 6. And I'm not going to change anything here. And I don't need the application size right now. Okay, I think it's okay. And while waiting, I think you have already noticed the environment is grayed out. If you are using Azure DevOps, it is disabled. But if you are using the GitHub option, it's enabled, and you can change your environments from here. I think it's about to finish. Let's try if it's finished. Okay, now I have published my Azure Web App with my Azure pipelines to Static Web App. And I think our function is ready. Now I am going to create a new function. Let's get an HTTP trigger. Okay, now I am going to change this code. And for this, there's a nice article and about Blazor and Azure functions. So I am going to copy and paste the sample code from here. It's a very simple function. It's returning the date time now. And let's copy this one. And I'm going to replace. Okay. Let's test it. Okay, it's working. Let's go back to our sample article. And I am going to share this URLs after the session. Now I'm going to change my Blazor application. So you can call the Azure function. And I'll go back to repository. Let's go back to pages and index. I will directly edit my code here. Okay, I need to add my Azure functions URL. And let's go back to my function. Okay, I get my function URL, and I will put it here. Okay, and I can use Azure Functions calls like this, but I want to show you how to link your Azure function. So I will go back to my static web app and functions. So you can link your functions directly to your static web app. So why I am linking my function? Because it is like hosting your function on static web app. And so I can delete this domain like this. And I think it's ready. Okay, and I commit a new change. So let's go back to pipelines. I started. And it's building with.NET 6 release candidate 1.
So I guess then the idea of having a function linked to the static web app is to make things like cross-origin resource sharing easier,
Yes.
things like that. Yeah, cool. It's a nice idea.
And you can easily manage your functions because you can see them on the portal, which functions you are using. And you don't need to add your domain, your source code. I think it's another nice stuff.
Yeah, it makes the development experience a bit nicer, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes, and let's check. And it's working. What I have done is I only change my code and submit my change. Azure pipeline starts automatically after my commit and publish it to directly my static web app. And I don't have any staging environment right now, so I can easily deploy it to the production. So if you want to make a staging environment, you can do it. It supports staging environments. So how many minutes do I have? Is it finished?
Yeah, I think it's time to wrap up. I think Josip is on the timer.
So the other GitHub demo is more simpler than this. As I showed at the beginning, you sign in with your GitHub account, select your repository, and you have to create GitHub workflows on your GitHub repository, and the GitHub actions start. And the other deployment stuff is similar. That's why I want to show you the Azure DevOps sample. And do you have any questions? Let me go with. Okay, thank you very much. And I will share the links from the chat.
Thank you, Mert. That was really good presentation.
Thank you.
Excellent. I can see Richard being all ready to go and raving, so all over to you, Richard.
Awesome. Right, let me just get my slides up. Hopefully you can see those all right. So this talk is all about the secrets of keeping up to date with AKS, because AKS totally changes all the time. We've got changes from Kubernetes, we've got changes from Azure, so it's very hard to keep up to date with it all. So a little bit about me first is, let me go to my next slide, if that button wants to work. Yes. Cool. So I'm Richard Hooper, also known as Pixel Robots Online. I'm an Azure Architect at a company called Intercept, who are based in the Netherlands. I'm based in the UK. I'm a Microsoft MVP and also a Microsoft Certified Trainer. My Twitter is @pixel_robots, and my blog is pixelrobots.co.uk. So very on brand with the yellow and black, as you can probably see. So the agenda of this little lightning session is, at the end of it, you're going to know how to keep up to date with AKS, what I do and what you could do yourself as well. So I'm going to give you all my secrets to know when something's coming out before Microsoft actually tell us it's coming out. But first, most importantly, why do you need to keep up to date with AKS? So the answer basically is, like I said a bit before, it's forever changing. Kubernetes themselves releases about 3 different major releases of their software every year. So like that'd be the 1.21 or 1.22, which is the now current one. But then they have all these little patch versions as well, so they come out quite regular. And sometimes there's a few changes in there. Usually it's security related, but in the past I've been caught out with some changes where I've needed to update my manifest files and stuff like that. And then on top of that, you have all of the Azure sort of integrations that they do. So all the AZ CLI commands, which constantly change, get updated, and sort of need to keep on up to date with all of that because it is going to change. So without further ado, let me change over to my other screen and we can go through the actual secrets. So hopefully you can see the AKS roadmap here. So this is all done from the AKS sort of PM teams in Microsoft. So they've got a load of product managers there, project managers, and they come in here and they have the backlog, and you can see everything that's on the backlog, which they want to do. Some of these are like issues from customers or ideas they have. So recently I put an issue in saying I want 1.22 of Kubernetes in AKS. So that's got put on to the backlog, and then it was planned, and I think it's currently in progress now. So this is just like a Kanban board of everything they're doing. There's a lot of stuff on here. It also goes all the way along. You've got what's in public preview and currently shipped, what's in GA, and then anything in GA that's ordered in a month, which they don't really use as often. They just sort of forget about it in this column and then delete it. But it's quite hard. Like I say, there's so many different sort of tiles in here, so it's very hard to keep up to date. But luckily, GitHub have us covered. You can see here it says updated 5 days ago. But if you click on the menu button, it tells you here what's been updated, all the activities. So 5 days ago, this PM basically converted a ticket to an issue, and then here they've done some other bits and pieces. They moved something from in progress or added something into the in progress column. So lots of changes here. So if you keep up to date with this, I sort of check it daily. You probably don't need to, because as you can see, it's been updated 5 days ago. So maybe just check it once a week, but you can sort of get a good feel to what the teams are working on and what their focus is and stuff like that. So this is definitely the first place to go. And another good thing here is if you look at the pull request tabs. So when they're going to do a new AKS release, they create a pull request and it gets put into here. And then they have their other PMs ready to sort of approve it, they review it and that. So we can look at some closed ones. So like the last release here was the release notes from the 16th. So you can see that they've just got like bits of changes in here. You can click on files changed, and inside here you'll see some of the release notes and what they are proposing, which is quite cool to see. Lots of changes in there, and then you can actually find out what's changing inside the actual base images of the worker nodes by expanding this, and you have a nice text file of all of the packages installed, all the base container images that they're putting on into the actual node image and everything like that. So this is a way I found out they were actually going to start looking at Containerd before they announced they were going to look at Containerd, because I could see inside here that there was packages for Containerd. So that's really cool to sort of keep an eye on that. So that's all good. That's the actual release notes in the PR format. But once it's actually released, you can go to the AKS releases page and you get a nice actual sort of release notes as such. So it has the release name at the top, and then you have all of the notes. So they put announcements in here. So we've got that new scale down mode. So they put stuff like that in there. If they're extending support of, say, an old version of Kubernetes, like they did with 1.18, then they put notes in here. So always keep a look on this. You can actually watch it as well. So you get an email every time they make a release, which is really cool. And they tell you about the new features. They usually, not always, but usually link to the Microsoft Docs page as well if it's ready to go. Sometimes they don't, but this time they have. So here we've got a new feature where you can integrate with a HPC cache into Azure Kubernetes. They also talked about a new preview feature, which is like the cloud controller. So currently all the AKS changes for Kubernetes are done in tree, so inside the Kubernetes branch, the main repo, but they're actually moving that out so Azure can update their part of Kubernetes without waiting for a new release of Kubernetes. So we can see more quicker changes coming to AKS soon once this is out. This is actually going to go live in 1.22 as well. So that's good. Keep up to date with that. And you can scroll through all the previous releases as well. So you get a nice history to compare things and everything. The next one is the Azure CLI GitHub repo. So there's a preview extension, which you should always install, but not for production loads, unless you want to name your node pool with a different name, then you can. But yeah, here, all I do is go to the pull request section. And once that loads, you can see all the pull requests, but there's certain ones here that we don't care about because like Azure Functions, Elastic, like here. But what we can do, we can just type in AKS, hit enter, and it actually filters out all of the current open pull requests for the Azure CLI. Now, with AKS, the Azure CLI is the first tool they create, basically, because that's what the PMs like to use because it's open source and everything. So you can find out, like here, we've got an add workload runtime support for AKS. I can click inside this. If there's any comments or notes, we can just sort of scroll down in, like, because it's GitHub, we can see they're going to create a node pool which can run WASM workload. So that's quite cool. I don't know if anyone knows that's coming, but now you do. And you can go to the files change section. You can see it's going to be coming in version 5.34 of the AKS CLI, which is cool. And it's telling you what kind of commands you might need to do when you're doing your AZ AKS create or AZ AKS node pool add. You have to add this to say, I want this new workload for my node pools, which is quite cool. And it's just all the other changes of the code. Usually you don't need to worry about too much of them because they usually have this sort of release notes history section and you get all of the commands there. So we go back to the pull request. We'll see if they've actually put any in recently. So if we click on close, and then what I do, I click on sort and I click on recently updated. So it sort of filters it. So the newest ones are at the top. And this AKS add-on, they had one here that closed because it took so long, but I sort of talked about the AKS add-on commands a little while ago and they've only just pushed it now. So it can take some time, so just keep an eye on this. But yeah, basically this one, we're going to get some new AZ AKS commands for add-ons. So you can list your add-ons, list what's available, enable, disable, all through a new simple command instead of AZ AKS update dash enable add-on or disable add-on. So that's quite cool and I'm quite excited for that one. So definitely keep an eye out for that. The next place I go to is the AKS office hours. So this is run by the Global Blackpack team, and they have lots of sessions every 2 weeks on a Thursday, 5 UK time. And you basically can get the meeting requests and links here, and then they have a list of what's coming up. So recently we just had one about Boxboat, which is an AKS health check tool. On the 7th of October, we have the Windows Container Deep Dive, so you can learn all about what's happening with Windows containers in AKS. You'll hear from usually the product managers and PMs about the features. You can ask them questions as well, and they're so open about it. It's really cool. And every now and again, you get the PM team on, and they give you a sort of a roadmap call. So they go over the roadmap and explain every bit. You can ask questions about certain topics you want to know more about, and they're always happy to answer. Next, we have obviously Azure updates, and here you can browse by category, click on containers, and then filter the results. But one thing with this is never up to date compared to the release notes you get from GitHub. It must be a manual process, I'm not sure, but I've seen here sometimes it's like this was out a little while ago, this was out a little while ago, and then they only released it on the 15th. And I've seen sometimes it's been 3 months before it gets updated onto here, whereas in the AKS release on GitHub, it's been there like 3 months before. So I always compare the two. I don't know why it's like that, but yeah, that's why I like to use a release notes a lot more than the Azure updates. But everyone loves Azure updates, so they go there. Then we also have obviously the Microsoft Docs, because that's where everyone goes in Azure to learn anything. So it's very hard looking at the normal Docs page to see what's new, because there's not a what's new section. I really wished they would put that in. I've always thought about creating a little edit in here and a little what's new box, but I don't know how they would take that. So what I do, I go to the Git repo, because everything's in Git. And you can see we actually had an update 4 hours ago, so we can click on that, and it should tell us what's updated and everything like that. So they were just changing a bit of code, changing that out and changing to that. So that's cool. But that's just a small one. But what we can do, we go back to the main repo, click on history, and if it wants to load, we get all the history, so we can go find out what's been changed, what's changed. Sometimes it's just a typo, sometimes it's a whole new page. But I just like to go over this and make sure I'm not missing anything from the previous releases or stuff like that. So, they're quite obvious with what they're doing. Like this one's just fixing spelling and formatting. This is updated the OMS AKS add-on document. And yeah, just go in, keep an eye on that. And it's really cool to sort of know what's coming. Another thing that I like to do myself is try and interact with all the PM team on sort of Twitter, because Twitter seems to be like the hub of technology. So all the techies are on Twitter. So try and get in with them. Try and talk to Brendan Burns, the co-founder of Kubernetes, because like he's so active and he's so passionate about the project and everything. So he's always there, happy to talk, I found. So yeah, definitely have a look at all of that stuff. And then obviously that's a lot of work, and not everyone has time in their day to do that. So why not let someone else like myself, little sort of plug here, but I've been doing daily YouTube shorts. So there's short videos, less than 60 seconds, about everything I'm finding inside the AKS repos and the websites that I've just shown you. Also the things I found on Twitter and stuff like that. Currently I've got 41 videos showing. So literally I've gone through different features like the disable local user accounts, all the way to check out Kubescape. So Kubescape's a cool tool where you can actually scan your AKS clusters or any Kubernetes clusters for vulnerabilities and stuff like that, because you will find Azure Defender doesn't work very well with AKS, and it hasn't picked up that latest vulnerability either. Even though you can fix it in Azure by updating your node images, they haven't actually put that in Azure Defender. So I wouldn't hold that as gospel just yet. Hopefully it will be fixed soon. We've got KubeCon coming and we've got Ignite, so fingers crossed we hear something new there. But yeah, it's basically, I've just done all of these shorts, and sometimes I will expand more and create a video about it. So give me a follow, and you can find out everything new and everything like that. And I think that's pretty much time, but I got some room for questions. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to reach out. I spent ages on this slide as well with the moving clouds.
Thank you, Richard. That was absolutely amazing, and I love the yellow-black sort of branding.
Cool.
No worries. Excellent. So if there's no questions for Richard, then I guess, Dwayne, it's your turn.
All right. That's a tough act to follow, Richard. There. got all the secrets, all the Kubernetes secrets right there, all provided in 15 minutes.
Yeah, it was hard, but we did it.
All right, let me find the right screen here. Here we go. All right, hold on one sec. All right. Everybody seeing my screen all right? Good. All right. Welcome. Thanks everybody for having me here today. My name's Dwayne Natwick. I am out of Michigan in the U.S. So it's unlike it's only a little bit after about 3 o'clock here p.m. So good evening to everybody that's joining over the pond. I am a Microsoft certified trainer and a Microsoft MVP with multiple certifications. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is Azure Policy and how you can use Azure Policy to manage compliance within Azure Security Center. So just a couple quick slides, and then I want to more get into to showing this in the demo. But just some quick things around what we can govern with policies. What are policies versus initiatives, and then we'll give a little bit of difference between Azure Security Center, the free version, and the Defender version, and then we'll get into the portal to discuss this. So, key things around governance. We have different types of governance that we want to manage with our policies within the Azure environment. It's our financials. What are managing our costs, where our resources are, what our activities are. There's security, which is what we'll talk a little bit, some about here today in terms of what we can do in Azure Security Center. Protecting our data, protecting our network, our identities, our threats. The whole defense in depth posture falls into really that security governance. And then I kind of lump compliance and regulatory standards into kind of the business governance, because it's not just what we have governmental or from an industry standpoint, but what our business requires us to govern, in terms of data privacy and things like that. So those are kind of the three pillars that I think about when I talk about governance and what we need to govern in terms of policies and initiatives. And then within Azure, we have the capabilities to manage these policies, and these policies ultimately are best practices that our organization has to really handle those three pillars. We have, like I said, cost and location, jurisdiction governance. Maintaining that certain resources maintain data sovereignty within our Azure environment, and security and what we're keeping secure and from a compliance standpoint. What we can do with all of these policies within Azure Policy and that push through to Azure Security Center is create initiatives, and these initiatives are just really a collection of policies and they can be put together to handle regulatory standards and governance and control and audit us for compliance. So what I'll show is how Azure policy can be utilized, and Azure Security Center can be used to help us with essentially preparing our environment and getting our environment compliant to certain regulatory or governmental standards and compliance, to therefore be able to prepare ourselves, to have ourselves ready, if we get audited or when we go through a compliance audit, we can utilize Azure Security Center to get us ready for that, and hopefully make our audit a little less stressful than in usual cases. So Azure Security Center. There's two pieces of Azure Security Center that you need to understand. The first is, and this changed about a year ago with when in last Ignite, was they used to have free and standard edition Azure Security Center. It's now Azure Defender Off and Azure Defender On. You get a lot of different tools and capabilities with Azure Defender Off, which is free with every subscription, and you get continuous assessment and security recommendations, and based on the Azure Security Baseline, that gives you, and you can then monitor your secure score to understand how secure you are in your network. That is great and gets you, a good portion of the way there in terms of securing your resources and managing to best practices. If you are in a regulatory and compliant area and have a need also to want to manage and get alerts on possible threats and things in your environment, you want to turn Azure Defender on, and I'll show everybody how to do that here in a moment. But you get certain things like vulnerability assessments. You get just-in-time virtual machine access if you want to protect against leaving management ports open. You get adaptive application controls, and then you get the whole threat protection suite, where it manages and monitors based on Microsoft's threat intelligence on where potential threats may lie within your environment. And the key piece here as well, as part of this talk, is the regulatory compliance dashboard and the reporting that you get on your resources there. So let's jump in and show that now. So I'm in my Azure portal. I do a lot of talks around Azure Security Center. So I have Azure Security Center right here in the front and center for everybody. You can very easily, if you're not familiar with Azure, you could very easily just type Security Center in here and it pops up. But as Security Center loads here for us, we see also on the side here, all of our capabilities. And if we go to pricing and settings down here under management, this shows us when we go to our subscription what we have here in terms of whether we have Defender turned on or whether Defender's off. And once it refreshes, you can see I have Defender turned on. Nice thing is very transparent in terms of what the costs are. If you're like Richard and running Kubernetes, you can turn on Kubernetes. If you're in the infrastructure as a service type environment, you've got your Azure servers in here, and you know how much that costs. Your Azure SQL databases, all of that runs right in here, and it's very transparent in terms of what the cost is. And you can toggle these on and off depending on your environment and what pieces of your environment you want this governance on. If you only use virtual machines for maybe dev environments, you might not need to have Defender turned on for that because you're just using it in a dev environment. Maybe you have all of your production in Kubernetes and container registries and SQL databases. But that shows you how you can toggle between and control your costs a little bit around Azure Defender. Like I said, Defender Off comes free when you turn your Azure subscription on, and it ties very closely to if you ever used Azure Advisor for your security recommendations and cost recommendations and things like that. It's pretty much the same information feeds it into both of those areas. But I have Defender turned on, so I have, when I go back to my Security Center dashboard to the overview, I have some certain tiles that are grayed out if you have Defender off, and that's regulatory compliance and Azure Defender. We get this secure score here by default. You always have this, and this is based on Azure Security Baseline, and tells us what recommendations we might want to put in place in terms of security controls in our environment based on what we have and based on Azure's best practices. And that's best practices that Microsoft recommends, what the large partners have. I always show enabling MFA is always your highest impact piece, and I always get dinged on it because this is my demo environment, so I don't have it enabled for all of my owners, because I give fake users admin privileges and things like that. Hopefully everybody has this one in here in their production environment, and it takes them there. Securing management ports, not having port 3389 or in Windows or 22 open in Linux helps you there. Vulnerabilities, doing vulnerability assessments. All of these things help to, turning all of these pieces on and turning these controls on in your environment all increase that secure score and get you closer to that 100%. If it's not applicable or you use a third-party resource within here, you can manage that as well by going in and saying this isn't applicable for your environment, or you use a third party, and you can justify it within your environment. As well as, one of the things that you can do here is you can implement it right here, right from within here. You can remediate it, as well as it gives you right here good your manual remediation steps that will tell you how you remediate it. So very helpful, because it doesn't just tell you, hey, you're in red in this area, but it also tells you how you can fix it. This particular one has the quick fix logic, which will run a logic app and run all of that, run everything you need in the background to fix it. All I have to do is select my resources and then select fix. So if I go back to my dashboard here and back to Security Center, to the overview, I wanted to get into, and the last thing I wanted to kind of show before we wrap things up here is regulatory compliance, because this is a very, if you require a certain level of regulatory compliance, say you need to make sure that you're maintaining compliance to GDPR or some health, or if you're a healthcare organization, you have certain healthcare requirements that you need to save or to protect against personal health information being exposed. We have these in here, or ISO certification. So we have our security benchmark in here, but I'm going to point out. Well, ISO, I forgot ISO is going. The ISO 27001 is going away. So I'll point it out from security benchmark, and you can see we have the different levels and areas of security benchmark within here, and we can expand and see what controls we need to put in place to get ourselves to green in these areas. So if we're getting audited on, based on Azure Security Benchmark, not the best example in this case because there's not really a regulatory standard against it, but you can look through each of these and see what resources are affected, and you can bring everything to green. So if in any kind of your requirement that you have that you're about to get audited on, you can put these in place. And I can go to managing compliance policies here, and I can add different compliance policies in here. So if I wanted to add additional standards in here, and let me find one. Here we have UK national NHS, which I'm assuming is a health standard in the UK. We can put that in place here, and it shows what the initiatives are in here. And if we are going to get audited on this, we can put this in place. We can assign it to our subscription. It will audit the environment, and then you can get yourself prepared for the audit. And hopefully, then when the auditors come in, and or you're doing a self audit and report, self-reporting, you can say, hey, we're green in all these areas, and these are not applicable, and we are ready to go. And we can then very easily, from a company standpoint, company perspective, be ready from an infrastructure perspective. Now, obviously, many of these, not myself not knowing this particular standard, but knowing HIPAA here in the U.S., HIPAA has a lot of process-based standards too, and what you're doing on paper and how you're pushing around this information as well. So this doesn't get you the full the full length to the end line in terms of saying, hey, I'm compliant, but it at least tells you you've got the controls in place in terms of your security infrastructure for that. And I did see a question from you, Richard. I believe what's going on is ISO 27001 is being updated. So right now it's kind of been taken offline in terms of the compliance areas as well. They've been doing some changes in here in Security Center from that standpoint. So I don't think it's going away. I think there's probably an update. So they've kind of taken it offline here. They took it offline just recently because I was just doing a class around this a couple weeks ago and it was still there, but now it looks like it's completely taken out here as well. So probably just updates that are taking place. They did the same thing with like the Azure CIS was one of the main ones, and they updated that to Azure Security Benchmark here within the last month or two. So, but that's mainly what I wanted to cover today. You know, I always find, you know, what's really helpful within Azure Security Center is you know, and one of the key differentiators around this is the regulatory compliance piece. Not just, and the secure score is helpful as well, which is that free piece. But if you're if you're a company that is that it has some level of regulatory standard, regulatory compliance that you have to meet, use this dashboard, and you can prepare your infrastructure. I'll open it up for any additional questions.
So, Dwayne, the secure score, how important is it?
How important is it?
Yeah,
I mean, what it does is it helps you really get your environment, especially if you're fairly new to Azure and to the cloud, is it really helps you to identify potential areas that you might have gaps in your environment, you know, gaps in your security. So you know, and you might and things that you just might forget. You know, it's a constant auditing process, and if you you know, if a lot of people are touching the environment too, and you don't have, you know, proper, maybe your, you know, proper controls or proper baseline templates in place, this helps you to continuously audit your environment as well, to find if maybe somebody didn't put the proper controls in place when they stood up a virtual machine or stood up a Kubernetes instance.
Cool. So that number will change over time, and then management will never ever see it 100% because it will constantly change. Is what I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah. Probably it probably would be tough to stay and be at 100%. It kind of audits like every 24 hours. So it could, you know, based on even just changes that Microsoft makes in the Azure environment, could have an impact on one of your resources in the environment as well. That's why, you know, it is a constant auditing process, and making sure that you have proper controls in place. Like I said, if certain controls and pieces don't, you have third-party tools that you utilize, you can very easily go in and say, you know, this doesn't affect me, or, you know, you can take it out of scope so that it doesn't affect your score. You know, and when you're looking at your dashboard as well, and you don't keep looking at the same red bar every time you go in. Any other questions?
Thank you, Dwayne.
No problem.
That was a really, really insightful presentation. Well, I think with Dwayne, we have concluded the evening of the lightning talks, and what an evening. I mean, really, really fantastic presentation from Phillip, Mert, Richard, and Dwayne, and now on Chris as well. It's really sad we couldn't get Martyn, but he has promised that he would try to make it in one of our other meetups. So I would be looking forward to see him in one of the follow-ups. In the meantime, now it's a time to socialize. So if you guys want to ask any questions or have a chat around, please do so for next couple of minutes before the meetup. We plan to wrap up about 8:30. In the meantime, we always on the lookout for great speakers. So if you do know someone who would be interested in speaking in Azure Thames Valley, please do point them to us or to our website, and they can register. They talk at the sessionize, and then just before we start socializing, just want to really give you a heads up of our next event, which is due on October 26th. We're going to back into sort of a standard rhythm of the main talk, which is about 40-45 minutes long. And the next time we're going to have a journey into Azure DevOps, which is going to be delivered by the Squared Up speakers, our own DevOps team, Tim and Shaz, who have actually gone through thick and thin to sort of correct our deployment stack to sort of convert it to Azure DevOps, and they will be sharing the stories and experiences. So I can promise you very, very entertaining and informative talk. We will also have a lightning talk as an introduction for the main talk that evening, which will be done by Mohan, technical consulting engineer Cisco. Then he would be giving us introduction to container and Kubernetes in Azure. So again, very eventful next event, and I would hope to see you in the large numbers joining us next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Our pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Thank you very much.
Then one have any questions, not necessarily related to lightning talks, but anything around the Azure Thames Valley? How did you find the presentation and format? Is this your first time? Alicia and I would be very happy to sort of help you in any way we can, but also we'll be very, very happy to hear any feedback you've got for us.
It was my first time presenting, and so I'm wondering how I could maybe present at future topics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that Nilesh?
It's Philip.
Oh, Philip. Oh, sorry, I didn't get. No, absolutely, Philip. If you have interesting talks that you would want to share with others, we would be delighted to hear from you. So I think the process is the same. You go to Sessionize, submit your talk, whether that's a full-size presentation or lightning talk, either would work fine. And then we can work out details in what would be the best time for you to present. But yeah, we would be delighted to have you again, Philip.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
Guys, this is Nilesh. This is the first time I've attended these sessions, and I find it very interesting and helpful. So I'm looking forward to attend next sessions. Even though it's very late for me, it's almost wee hours in India.
Oh, so you've joined us from India. Well, that's great to hear. Wow. Whereabouts in India are you?
I'm living in Gujarat.
Okay.
It's a western part of India.
Okay. Well, I'm amazed that we got the attendee from India. How did you find about Azure Thames Valley?
I was looking through my LinkedIn feed, and
Mm-hmm.
I subscribed Azure tag, and I found out about your session.
I see. Okay. Excellent. Yes, I think Alicia is very, very helpful here by telling me I'm not sharing my screen, and apologies for that. And I'm going to do that now. Sorry. So what I've said now, you can actually see I'm not talking nonsense. We do indeed have our own speakers, Tim Wheel and Shaz for next time, and Mohan. So apologies for that. Thank you, Alicia. Sorry, Nilesh. So you were telling, so you've been looking for Azure groups, and then that's how you came across the Azure Thames Valley.
Yep.
Excellent, excellent, good. Well, we're certainly looking forward to see you in our next event, and more to come. But are there any particular topics that you were interested in seeing in our meetups?
I would very much like to see like a serverless and in details, like the information. I've been working in serverless since last 3 years. So I would like to go very much deeper in this topic if we have opportunity.
So you'd love to see a bit more serverless in depth. Would that be specific to Azure functions, or would you be going broader like AWS, Lambdas, etc.?
I have worked on both things, but I would just like to grow knowledge on an entire ecosystem, like entire serverless ecosystem.
Okay.
So there are various options available, and what are the pros and cons, and what fits the best cost and sort of stuff.
Sure. Well, that's very useful information, Nilesh. Thank you.
And special topic is like how do we use serverless computing in machine learning?
And machine learning as well.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that certainly gives us a very specific sort of area to focus on. We'll keep an eye. If you do find it, folks, please stay tuned. It should be on our website. But likewise, given you might be a great presenter for us, maybe you have all the knowledge we need. So if you ever being tempted to do a presentation, well, we would be really happy to have you, Nilesh.
I haven't given any presentation since
maybe this is the right time to do it then.
Yeah, I'll definitely think about it.
Yes. Cool. No worries, Nilesh. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
No worries. Well, in that case, I believe we're ready to wrap up, and I shall see you in a month's time, Nilesh.
Yep, definitely. And
thanks for joining, Nilesh.
You mentioned it's on 26th, right?
26th of October, yes, same time in the evening.
Yep, it's my birthday, so I'll probably be on it.
Oh, there you go. See, now we're talking. Mine is the 27th. Mine is on the 27th. So let's have a party then.
Definitely.
Thank you, Nilesh.
All right.
Cheers. Have a good evening. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.